All right, let's get started. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm actually on. I'm always amazed when anything goes right. Well, welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. This is about, Steve has been doing this for so many years. We do have a couple of things coming up. We've got an in-person class coming up in Chicago, April 17th and 18th. Another online class, Stats, Graphs, and Data Science one coming up. Working on a webinar on REO short sales concessions. Somebody tells me we're going to be seeing a lot more of those. Is that possible? And then Isaac Peck from OREP will be talking about risk and avoid liability coming up soon. In addition to the classes, we do have the asset analyst report, $199 a year. If you subscribe to that, you get the class for half price, besides other free stuff and other free stuff. Okay, so now dividing this webinar up in kind of two sections, my short one and Steve's longer one. The now future and the near future. I'll be talking about the near future briefly, and then Steve will be talking about the now future for the rest of it. I think you're all aware of tremendous changes going on, and I think it's even bigger than we expect, because for the first time in many, many years, the top regulators, government regulators, are really looking at serious changes. I've been involved in some of those. So in brief, the now future Steve will be talking about requires, well, selling yourself, unfortunately, and education. If you want to sell new stuff, you got to figure new stuff out. And the near future requires marketing and education. That's what Steve will be talking about. We're talking about technical skills, visuals, interactive dashboard concepts. We'll be looking more and more at that. Explicitly recognizing risk and reliability measures instead of trust me, my point value is good. And the whole idea is that you can be better, more respected, more rewarded. When I became an appraiser, I felt respected like an authority figure, and that's changed. So I believe we can come back to that. Appraisal will never be the same. I really believe that now. This is my teddy bear that always helps. His name is Tedward. My background, how I got here, was kind of an accident of going back to graduate level schools after I was an appraiser, mostly in economics, statistics, math, insurance, GIS, things like that. And then Steve here, I'll just let you read his bio. First time I met Steve, he was talking about these same topics, getting away from lender business, and he's done it very successfully. And Steve runs, of course, the National Appraisers Forum, which has hundreds of members all over the country that start out small. He's doing this from the goodness of his heart, trying to help the profession and other individuals like you and me. And he's been a good friend to me, and I thank you very much, Steve, for being here. So current response issues, I just got about 12 or 15 slides, and then we'll take about a 1 or 2 minute break, and I'll turn it over to Steve. So this is kind of more short-term, long-term stuff in terms of the changes that are coming. Certainly current issues include bias and diversity, valuation alternatives, the quote, excess of appraisers. I was the first one to write about an excess of appraisers when everybody else was talking about the shortage of appraisers, because you know what happens every 12 years, regular as clockwork. Change in the valuation environment. The technology and the valuation expert is needed in the future. It's just going to be changed. You're all aware that Fannie Mae is going over to this professional inspectors. Well, what does that leave us? We need to be the professional analysts. That's where our emphasis needs to be, which includes objective data selection, explicitly recognizing the uncertainty in what we're dealing with. We pretended that we got a point value and that's it, and it's no wonder it's an issue. And measurement of risk and reliability. So what is the challenge that we're facing? Our old customers are changing. The regulations are changing for them as well as for us. Our old customers are not what they were. How can we adapt and take advantage? Those are the key words. How can we adapt, but also take advantage of the changes, because we are needed? How do we match these new needs that are coming up with the new services that we're in the best position to provide. How can we match new types of clients to their needs? And that'll be what Steve is primarily talking about here. Okay, our mission is to connect our special expertise with the potential of today's data science tools and compete with new tools and new attitudes. I've recently started talking about, changing an attitude changes the world. Well, it starts inside. So a quick review, and again, I won't go on long. This is really Steve's show today, but what do our clients want? It's good for us to kind of get back to foundation. What are we really selling? Well, here's the old target thing here. Well, if the true target is there and we're off to the upper right, that could be a biased appraiser or it could be a biased analysis. And that's what evidence-based valuation that we teach is about, is eliminating the analytic bias from our work or the vulnerability to be accused of bias. The center bullet point, yeah, whatever that round thing is accurate, but it's not very precise. It's tending towards the right answer. So these are the two things we're trying to eliminate. Number one, not be biased analytically. Number two, be precise or sure about what we're getting. So this is true and sure. All of this presumes that we ask the right question in the first place, which is where the greatest mistakes are made. And AVMs will also make those greatest mistakes. Okay, let's go on. So let's compare objective evidence with subjective judgment. Remember, USPAP and what we've been trained is all about being believable, worthy of belief, credibility. That's what USPAP is about. Objective is free of bias and based on facts instead of thoughts and opinions. Subjective is being not impartial, not based on your opinions or feelings, and not based on belief or believability, credibility. Yeah, and yet USPAP still forces us to shoot for that. It's not entirely wrong, but that shouldn't be the key goal. Reliability ought to be. A couple of words here that are important. Model. The model is what you decide as the path to the solution. In the appraisal of real estate, it says that there's three models: the cost approach, the income approach, the sales comparison are all models. The entire appraisal process is a model. All we do as an evidence-based valuation is reduce that problem to smaller pieces and parts, address those with correct algorithms. Which algorithm to choose is your decision. So you as the expert make modeling decisions and decide on how the computer is going to help you. So this is kind of the old way of doing things. The focus now is on data evidence instead of supporting your judgment. And the analysis is a 5-step process that, like we teach, focusing on the data that is actual evidence. If you have to put in one short sentence, the difference of what we try to teach and what is happening to us is we need to get back to measuring markets instead of comparing comps. Looking at market. We are market analysts. It's been that in the beginning of the appraisal profession, it was always about measuring markets. Just we didn't have the data to do it. Today we do. Why do we focus on graphs and stats graphs and data science, the class? Well, they're important because humans are very good visually, very, very good. The brain zonks out after about 3, 4, 5 comps. When you got 12 comps, the human brain just is not able to comprehend those in one thought. We're no longer restricted by square pieces of paper, rectangular square pieces of paper. And most market segments are more than 3. Almost all are, or it might be less than 3. So what we focus on there is what is the right amount of data? What is the ideal? So what is market analysis? It's a process for examining demand and supply for a specific market segment. Think about it. What do we really care about? Do we really care about all the houses in the neighborhood or all the gas stations? We care only about what competes directly with the subject property. So that's the emphasis of what we do. So which is the market segment? How do we delineate it? What is the trend going on? It's one of the things we talk about with our price indexing model, the scatter plot and the simple regression trend line. And I apologize for going fast. For those of you who have not been in the class, this is a quick overview of what we're about. And certainly picking up trend changes. This is a graph of an area in San Diego called Mira Mesa. And I've been using Mira Mesa as kind of a bellwether neighborhood in San Diego for many, many years in the class. And I ran this around the end of the last year. And what happened? Look at that. Look how dramatically just graphing the dots just tells you what's going on. And then somebody said, well, how's it been since then? And I thought, okay, well, let me take a look at it. So I ran it for about a few months. And this starts in February and ran to the end of 23. So it looks like the market's turning around a little bit. But this was a sub-market that was controlled for square foot, among other things. So for this particular market segment, it looks like the trend is turning around. We also talk about the importance of critical thinking. You know, we as appraisers, we're taught for our thinking, our critical thinking, our ability to analyze. The critical thinking has several parts: reasoning, evaluating, solving problems, making those decisions, and analyzing. So we talk about that also. Another major difference between traditional appraisal and the evidence-based valuation process is in data science, actually, is that there's two analytics, and we cleanly separate them because the computers do a much better job, and it's easier for us to conceive of this. Number one, select the best data set, and number two, predict from that data set. In data science, 80% of the battle is getting the right data. So we talk about the 5 dimensions of similarity: property type, transaction, time, location, and preferences. I'm going to go through this really quickly. It's how we reduce the problem selection into what we call 5 dimensions. There are reasons for that, mathematical reasons for that. But I'm going to keep moving on here, give plenty of time for Steve. The webinar we got coming up is critical on motivation, financing, adaptation, REOs. We will have a webinar coming up on this particular dimension, probably in the next month or two. And the prediction, there's really only 3 basic ways of adjusting or predicting: contrasting, associating, and sequence, putting things in sequence. Comparing and contrast groups, correlation and simple regression, and sequencing, just putting things in order. And I usually do an example of that. My specialty is view values, and that's what's called ordinal statistics, non-parametric methods. Not a big deal. It's something that really is very commonsensical. So what is R? We use R instead of spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are now very old and very, very vulnerable to making mistakes, not very reproducible. R is the most widely used analytics package in the whole world. There's a huge community, both outside of appraising and within the appraisal group, community of asset analysts. John and Bruce are both heavy contributors to that, and several other people. So that's us helping each other on our using our packages, and reusable. You do it once and then you reuse it for the rest of your profession. So it's the tool, it's the community, and the competence. Very briefly, you got 2 or 3 more slides here, and I'll turn it over to Steve. There's R Studio, and R packages. We don't use R itself. That's for the geeko computer programmer type people. We take advantage of them, let them do the hard work. Our user interface is R Studio, and then there's thousands of R packages that serve all kinds of different purposes. And those are the ones that we most commonly use for analysis, graphs, visuals, maps, and reporting. This is what the R Studio looks like. It's got the 4 panes. On the upper left is that's R Studio is the 4 panes. The upper left one is kind of like a word processor when you can look at data. The bottom left is the computer console type of stuff that programmers are used to. upper right keeps track of everything you do. You never lose any work, never. It's all right there. And the bottom right is the miscellaneous one where you keep tracks of your files, your graphs, the packages you have installed and ready to go. You can make direct connections to the internet, even pull down your MLS right through there. I'll go through this very quickly. Stats, graphs, and data science. That's our main course. What is science? Well, science is a systematic study by observation or experiment. Kind of what we do by an expert in the scientific method and the field of study. That's you. You're an expert in the method and in the field of study. Data is the source of information, anything that can be measured, counted, or put in sequence. Graphs connect your brain with the large groups of data, the market data, not 3 comps. Visual. And then science is your expert model decisions. So data science includes statistics, algorithms, machine learning, artificial, it kind of encompasses all of that. Actually, very little statistics. We don't, other than mean, median, mode, range, we don't use much inferential statistics. We don't use inferential statistics at all. We are planning a 7-hour online class in about 2 or 3 months, free for all graduates of stats, graphs, and data science. Don't have a date set for it, but be aware it's free, particularly if you took the class a long time ago. It'll bring you up to date on the R stuff so you can start using it just by pushing a button, making it go. And probably we're going to charge for others. I'm not going to go through this step by step, but this is kind of going from traditional appraisal to the process of modernizing to evidence-based valuation on the far right. Notice that the focus here is getting to the competitive market segment, all the data that's relevant, optimizing that data set, applying one of the 3 predictive tools, and integrating a reliability score with our work, which is what's really going to be demanded in the market in the near future. And dashboards. Okay, oh, well, I'm going to skip through that. That's wrong. And one last tribute here to a guy by the name of Socrates. The beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. So we do spend some time on using the right words. I've said many times the big problem with statistics is words. And with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Steve. We'll take about a 1 or 2 minute break here while I get off and we put Steve on with his PowerPoint. And once again, Steve has been doing this for many years and been really, this is a third economic cycle in the United States that I've heard Steve to do this type of thing. So let's take a 2 minute break and I will get off and Steve will get on.
Steve, let me just give a little shout out to Steve while he's setting up. I've known Steve since about 1982. I was in the banking business at the time. Steve was an independent appraiser. He literally saved my association tens of millions of dollars in potential losses due to mortgage fraud, appraisal fraud that Steve had uncovered. And then I've stayed in touch with him in the interim. And because of Steve, I no longer do AMC or mortgage assignments. I stopped many years ago. Steve was very instrumental in that, and maybe some of the others here on board also. Thanks, Steve.
All right, thank you very much. And also John and Bruce, if you guys ever, if you want to just chime in, because I know both of you have gotten out of loan work a long time ago, except Bruce, who dived right back into it as a reviewer. Boo, boo. Okay. Anytime you're ready to go, Steve. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I was just thinking this is the first PowerPoint presentation I've created since 2003, when I was running around the country teaching the real estate fraud seminar, trying to help appraisers stay out of trouble. George, and his George Dell webpage put this class title as Jumping into Non-Lender Work. And I'd like to think of it more as easing into it, because you can't just jump from doing what I called lender work with reckless abandon, trying to get, your production up to make a living, into the professional level of appraising that other clients might demand more from us than a lender client, or that we can get by with when we're doing lender work. And one of the underlying concepts behind appraisal licensing, was the public good. And I'm not sure that our industry ever really understood what the public good means. But there's every appraisal has a life of its own after it leaves our hands. And people may use reports that we wrote for one purpose or try to use them for another purpose. And sometimes that can be a problem for us. But before you think about doing other work, you have to learn terminology, and the different definitions that are used in different venues. A lot of times in the work that I do, I don't write a report. I'm not asked to write a report. I am asked to render an opinion. And I've showed up with just a graph of my data, and then testified about the market conditions, the market trend. And I've had entire court cases turn on the slope of the graph, my graph, and the other expert's graph, and then be asked to explain the difference, which, not knowing the selection criteria of the other appraiser, but knowing my selection criteria, I basically hit the nail on the head with what your typical appraiser does to create graphs versus what I do, which is identifying the market segment and concentrating on that. This is something I got off the internet, with someone trying to explain what appraisers do. Maybe if you take, and by the way, this presentation will make available on the appraisers forum, so you don't need to take notes or anything, but being aware of what others expect from us is a good thing. And it's something that we need to bear in mind. George talked about reliability, and going from using 3 comps or 6 comps to looking at all the market data and analyzing all of the data is a new point of view. For me, in my education, a turning point came around 1990 when I took the highest and best use and market analysis course, which causes you to think of market data completely differently than finding 3 comps or 6 comps. And I recall in 1982, when Craig Gilbert called me, I had written a report and I had a table of sales in there, something I learned from the old residential applications course 102 from the Society of Real Estate Appraisers. In 1982, we were in the middle of a recession where concessions were the driving force behind prices. And I think that's the situation we're faced with, we're going into this year. We already heard about, have been hearing about the term buy downs on interest rates, which costs the seller money. Anything the seller pays out or gives away is a concession. And it takes skill, it takes finesse for the appraiser to verify their sales and find out about those, because those are the kind of things that brokers don't want to talk about. They don't put in the multiple. And yet sometimes it can be a major adjustment factor. I've had, just for motivation adjustments alone, I've made 25% adjustments. And there's lots of reasons why someone might overpay or someone might underpay, but it's our job to ferret out those motivations, the terms and concessions or personal property included in each transaction. And many appraisers who've only done lender work have gotten used to using two sources of data, but not verifying their data. So I think as we're going into this recessionary market, measuring the trends and reporting the trends is a good habit to get in just a good habit to get into, because only the real estate appraiser can measure local market trends. National real estate writers can't do it. CAR, NAR don't do it. Brokers don't know how to do it. So as you think about perhaps moving into or moving away from lender work, think about creating good examples. And by that, I mean verifying what the market condition is and demonstrating it in your report with graphs and verifying your market data, verifying information. Like I have a favorite quote from an assessor, a senior appraiser in the assessor's office. Sometimes we need to check and verify the information on our subject. And what he said to me one morning when I was standing at the counter talking to him, he said, "Don't rely on our information." That stuck with me. And in that particular instance, there was a big difference between what the assessor showed and what I had measured. And I've actually had assessors change the public record to reflect my diagram when they had missed, or not missed, maybe that's not the right word, when the plans had changed from the original house that got built and they added a 625 square foot family room that was not on the assessor roll. Verifying market data includes verifying the motivations, the terms, the personal property, and checking that we have the correct information from the MLS or from our data source. I had one commercial broker that I was verifying a comp with on an apartment building who told me, "Don't trust CoStar because what they publish is not what I submitted." Let it sink in. Just because it's in black and white, published in the MLS or some other data source, doesn't mean it's accurate. And yet we use it at face value. And sometimes that can get us in trouble. The thing about real estate markets is they're almost never stable. They're stable for short periods of time between a rising market and a declining market, or between a declining market and a rising market. Learning to measure what the market is doing and do so accurately, and perhaps even comparing and contrasting how our market segment is performing compared to the neighborhood or compared to the city or even the county. I know on some of my larger commercial reports where they want a market analysis as well as an appraisal, we'll use county, city, zip code, and neighborhood comps or graphs to demonstrate either we're performing equal to, better than, or worse than the generalized market. In this market that we've are experiencing now, prices began to stabilize. And then in my market, in the Inland Empire, began to decline. My first measure of decline came about June of last year. And in some cities, the prices have gone down on a price per square foot basis, more than 10%. This is the kind of thing that we should know on every report. And in some instances, we have reports where we have to give a future value, especially those that are doing ERC work. But sometimes on even just a regular single family, we may have something that's under construction and won't be finished for 6 months or a year. So knowing how to not only measure the past, but project the future is a good thing. I know I was not trained in appraisal. I was given a list of adjustments and told I had to do 3 reports a day. And so timing was the big motivating factor in my savings alone, not the quality of the work per se. As long as it looked good and there were no red flags, everything went through. You cannot embrace and employ good valuation processes and procedures going fast. So doing non-lending work, slow down and think about the process and procedure. We all certify compliance with uniform standard, which includes certifying that we're using good valuation processes and procedures. And to me, learning to verify information is part and parcel. The verification step in the market approach is the due diligence step as far as I'm concerned. And it separates the vocational appraiser from the professional. Here's a graph that I used in a litigation report where the decision turned on the graph. The appraiser, all of their data came from older time periods. My primary market data came from the newest comps, and you can see that this, and this was just raw land. It wasn't a finished lot or anything, but raw land was heavily speculated up, and then it crashed heavily. As a reviewer, when you do a review, you're either doing it before a loan is funded or before action is taken on that report, or after. And I've done a lot of post-funding reviews where the checkbox on the form that the market was stable was false, and it could be easily proven. Whenever someone comes after us from a professional liability standpoint, they're likely to hire someone like Craig or Bruce, George, myself, to review our work product. And if we've made misstatements of fact, shine the light on them. And when I taught the fraud seminar, which I did about 50 times across the country, I used to ask, how many mistakes can an appraiser make before the report is misleading? If every mistake made favors a higher value or a lower value, how many mistakes does it take before the report is actually fraudulent? 2, 3, 4. So measuring our market segment and reporting what it is doing is a good thing, and it should be part and parcel of our daily work. And that's, what evidence-based valuation is trying to do for us. We're trying to get to a more accurate value. And in most of my reports, I don't, I give a range, and then I identify the point value as a midpoint within that range, or as being, for the subject property, above the midpoint or below the midpoint for some valid reason, which could be it's a stronger property, or it could be that the market is weak. But the point value is only good today, but the range is more meaningful in terms of risk analysis. People were trying to rely upon our work. I use the term vocational appraiser, which is what I started out to be. I was asked to do 3 reports today, and I did that for a year. I actually peaked at 129 reports in 1 month in May of 1977. I don't do 129 reports in 3 years anymore. I don't want to. In fact, I'd rather not even write a report. So learning to measure and actually graph market trends is a good thing. And it's a good thing to include in your reports, not just in your file. I've had several cases where what showed in the public record and what showed in the permit file were different. And even cases where what showed in the planning department file was completely different. In one case in Beverly Hills Post Office, the planning department file revealed that the property had been a local contractor dump, and there was 60 feet of unconsolidated fill that had to be removed. New clean soil brought in and recompacted. And this was a piece of land, 12 acres, that had been used for a development loan for 24 lots. And it was not buildable land at all. Only revealed from the planning department file. Now, I know in California, we have planning departments and we have general plans, which some residential appraisers may not know that the general plan, if there's a conflict between the general plan and the zoning, that the general plan will rule over the zoning. As an example, I have a case right now, it's a live case where the zoning is R1. It's in the county of San Bernardino. And when I talked to county planning, they told me, yes, it is zoned R1, but it's in the sphere of influence of the city of Loma Linda. So when I called the city of Loma Linda, the planning department said, oh yeah, we're going to annex that land and it's zoned general commercial. The other appraiser used residential land sales. I used general commercial land sales. And the difference was like $12 a foot compared to $25 a foot. That case has not yet been gone to court, but it will be going to court here in April. So through the verification process, we can find out about the transaction terms. We can find out about property information. I don't know, Craig, you have been through the same recessions George and I have been through in your career. How much have you seen packed into prices as far as concessions?
I've seen automobiles. I saw one track, they were including a Porsche in the garage.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of lowering the price, which would make existing owners upset who had just bought or maybe under contract, the price stayed the same, but they put a $40,000 or $50,000 car in the garage. We've seen everything. New homes are extremely difficult sometimes because the sales offices often will hide that from appraisers. Unfortunately, others are more forthcoming. But
Yeah.
we've seen many large concessions when prices are declining.
We had tracks in my region that were selling in the 700,000-800,000 range that ultimately included either a new BMW or a new full-size Mercedes. So you're talking $60,000-$70,000 worth of personal property packed into the sales price.
I know that Bruce might have a comment on this. Unmute yourself, Bruce. There you go.
Sorry, I had a hard time getting to that button. Yeah, I'm seeing more and more of that. I'm seeing buy downs, and I'm seeing appraisers. I do a lot of review work, and I'm seeing appraisers continue to check stable. They're intimidated about reporting declining market conditions. If that's what's going on, you have to be honest and you have to report it. It will be all bad if you don't.
And if you do a scatter plot price index, you don't have to defend it. It's just there. And John, feel free to chime in when you have a comment along these lines too, please.
Most appraisers are used to doing the direct sales comparison exclusively. And my view on the direct sales comparison is if you're going to use few sales, it becomes more critical, especially in a declining market or a soft market. It becomes more critical to verify the terms, motivations, concessions. And what I wrote here is just an example of something that I worked on this year. The sale was one was selected because it's a model match, requiring only a time adjustment as far as any physical adjustments. But it included the buyer wanted the furniture, and they figured that the furniture was worth about 5%. So that was my largest adjustment. Let me go back. Sale 2, the seller carried the paper, but it wasn't below market. It was at 6 3/4, I think it was. But the point being, what you find out during the verification call is the kind of things that's driving prices today that's not included in our data sources, whether it's a residential property or now in some commercial properties, we're having like in my submarket area, office buildings are a high vacancy item, and so they're giving stuff away to effectuate sales. If you don't know how to use a spreadsheet, it's not that difficult, but it can be intimidating. Like a lot of people have math phobia. I had to learn to use a spreadsheet on my own, and being dyslexic as I am, I found it difficult. But by staying at it, I learned to do, some basic things. Now, I'm not fancy like George or Bruce, but I know how to do basic add, subtract, multiply, divide, calculate a standard deviation, a mean and a median, and a mode, and graph the data. And that served me well. Other friends, I have friends that their spreadsheets are so complex that it'll actually freeze up their computers. But that's not me. I'm a simpleton. Creating a market data array is a good thing to demonstrate that you did consider more than 3 or 6 sales, that you considered 25 that were relevant to what the subject is, to where the subject is. I tend to do a market data array and then time adjust the data and look at the price per square foot trend to help me focus on my time adjustments. So there are many, many different places to go for business. And as an example, in California, there's a lot of cities that have surplus properties that were once targets of redevelopment. They need to sell those properties and they need appraisals. Counties, state and federal agencies need appraisals. But almost none of them require or use forms. So learning to use a word processing program, or learning to write appraisals in R and getting away from forms is a good thing to start working on. We do a lot of work for water districts or utilities who are trying to or need to either acquire property or acquire an easement across property. And it's kind of a continuum of work, but it's not high level. It's not high volume like lender work, like we were used to when we were doing lender work. We do a lot of date of death, a lot of casualty loss. Right now, we've got flooding going on in my region. there are entire tracts in the Coachella Valley that have flooded and stayed flooded for weeks at a time. And learning to do that and learning to how to search for comparables that you can use to demonstrate the loss in value for some negative factor is a good thing, and it takes time. Bonding companies are often a source of business. The trouble with me and bonding companies is they want it too fast. If someone's in prison on a bond and they need an appraisal, they want it is just like a lender. They want it lickety split. And I'm not fast like I used to be. We had a case in Palm Springs where they call it the Israeli prostitution ring. And literally the principals were all in jail, and they were Israeli, and a lot of their friends donated property to use in lieu of a bond. So we would go out and appraise properties, and we weren't coming up with enough value. So they kept giving us more properties to include in the appraisal. And we ended up going to court and to testify to our appraisal. Fortunately, the district attorney knew me and knew my work because I'd been doing seminars for district attorneys for a number of years. And the bond was accepted. But I can tell you that when you show up for a criminal case, the attorneys for the defense are all in crumpled suits. It looked like that movie with Paul Newman where he was a drunk, you know, and the district attorneys are all wearing black and their shiny faces. It's almost comical. Legal cases, my first cases, I started out doing bankruptcies, judicial foreclosures, bankruptcy. A lot of times the debtor has already borrowed money to the extent that their equity is gone, but they need a high appraisal to keep it from being foreclosed on. Meaning for me that I can't work for them. And Bruce, you could check me on this. About half the time when I'm contacted by a law firm or an attorney, I can't really work on the case because they want an advocate. And I once gave a dinner speech to my local appraisal institute chapter, and I said, you know, I'm not the busiest appraiser in the world because I'm a neutral. And then I turned in one direction and let them look at me from one direction. Then I turned my other side, and it was about then that they all began laughing because a lot of them know that what they do is advocacy work. And I was actually resistant to getting designated because of my review work back in the late 70s, reviewing work of our chapter presidents and national directors that was fraudulent. I'm sure, Craig, you remember those days.
Yes, I do.
So judicial foreclosure is something that doesn't happen very often. It happens when the lender thinks they're going to take a loss, and they've got either a guarantee from the debtor or they think the debtor has equity in something else. A judicial foreclosure in California, different than a regular foreclosure or a non-judicial foreclosure, gives the lender the right to go for a deficiency. Again, if a debtor wants to hire, or the attorney for the debtor wants to hire an appraiser, they probably want a high value, which means I probably can't work for them. That is, they want a directed value, not an objective value. Other types of litigation cases, specific performance, casualty loss, and contracts. One I forgot to add on here is we have a current case that's a partition case where partners in real estate, some partners want out, other partners do not. And they actually have a partition referee handling the case, which was our client, and he only wants the truth. So every type of litigation case can have one side of the case that doesn't want the truth, but they want a directed value, or they want an advocacy working for them. And I make it clear at the very beginning of a conversation with a new client that I'm just a neutral. I'm not an advocate. And a lot of times that pretty much ends our conversation, which is fine. Marketing is different than selling. I spent some time in sales and doing different things, but marketing, you really need to make a plan, and it's going to take at least 6 weeks, probably, before you see results of marketing efforts. One of the more successful appraisers in my region told me one time at a luncheon that he spends 25% of his time marketing, and that 25% includes his involvement in the International Right-of-Way Association, where there are potential clients or consultants, potential clients in the form of public agencies and or consultants. I began marketing to non-lender groups by giving talks to the local MLS, giving talks to different sections of the Bar Association in my region. At the time, I was in the San Fernando Valley, and so there were probably 6 different Bar Association groups in the Valley. And I began giving talks on the definition of market value and how it's a test for appraisers to apply to their subject if it's a sale, and to each comparable relied upon. And that began paying off within a year. I know we have some members of the National Appraisal Forum that have have had great success through their email newsletters. And I probably, some of them are in this meeting today. So every client that we might PR for work, they probably already have someone that they're using. Why should they use you or me over who they've been using? Do we have competence in an area that's a specialty or a geographic area? Do we have ethics? Where do you get ethics? George and I have talked about this. Ethics can be taught, but uniform standards simply presumes that every appraiser who got licensed is ethical. But that's not true. So when I market myself as a neutral, objective, unbiased, and ethical. Which means half the people won't hire me, which is fine. We kind of already went through this. I'm sorry if this is redundant. And one of the things I learned in my real estate fraud research of 20 odd years ago is something called affinity frauds. Within a group, one identifiable group, which could be nationality, religion, race, or lifestyle, a member of that affinity group can fool or dupe another member easier than an outsider can. Does that make sense? Sometimes in real estate fraud cases, It's an affinity fraud and an elder abuse case and a mortgage fraud case. Most mortgage fraud cases that I've worked on have had an inflated and misleading appraisal. The simplest definition of appraisal fraud is an inflated or misleading report. Unfortunately, when FIREA was written, it didn't tell the lenders not to pressure appraisers into inflating values or writing misleading reports. What it did say was, if you spot an appraisal fraud, fill out a suspicious activity report. How different our world would have been if it said, Mr. Banker, do not pressure appraisers or let your agents pressure appraisers into inflating values or writing misleading reports. The last 30 years would have been completely different. I've already covered this. And George, how much time have I got?
Oh, you're good. We want to save some time for Q and A. You're about an hour right now. You can go 15, 20 minutes more if you like.
Sure. There are very few other types of clients that are going to have the volume of steady work that we were used to when we were doing loan work. And most of them don't expect a form report at all. They're not used to them. To me, I'd rather write a short narrative. In fact, I forget what year UAD came into being. Maybe Craig, you can refresh me.
I think it was 2010.
Okay,
approximately.
around the time of UAD, my forms program was expiring and I was going to have to renew it. And I decided that I became form incompetent. I'm UAD incompetent. And gladly so. I like using my whole vocabulary. I don't like to be, well, what Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae did was they set the appraisal industry up to get rid of them by mining their data, mining their reports, and populating their database. And, you know, unfortunately, those appraisers who only do lender work are going to be hurting in the near future. As George says, we don't use linear regression, high-level statistics, but we do use basic descriptive statistics. And when we can describe what we did and what our data is telling us and what demonstrate it with a graph, it really sets us apart from other people who don't do that. If you're working on a case where, you know, there's an opposing appraiser on the other side, it sets our report head and shoulders above what would be I guess you would say, competition. So I asked 3 or 4 other appraisers, Ryan Lindquist, Joe Lynch, Jamie Owens, Jim Westman. So from across the country, you know, Sacramento, Colorado, Ohio, and they said this is just a condensation of what they told me that helped them. Become a specialist in a product or geographic area. My personal specialty started in the early 1980s. I picked 5 zip codes to specialize geographically. And I picked high-end housing. At that time, I drew a line at $3 million. And I verified every sale over $3 million in Los Angeles County. And then on Thursday, they would have broker open houses for the new listings. Any listing over $3 million, I would go to the open house. Then I could interview the broker. I could see the property. I could see its view. And I could verify perhaps other sales that I was working on to use as comps. I became active in the local MLS, worked on committees. I know Craig still does that today. I tell agents I'm not fast or cheap enough to do lender work, but I welcome their referrals whenever they have a client that has some valuation need. And so probably 25% of my work come from agents who know me, who know that if they refer a client to me, I will try to do a good job, and I'll hopefully get positive feedback to them from their client for the work product that we did. Providing regular contact with target markets or market sources is a good thing, and that can, for me, that has been writing a one-page informative thing that has to do with valuation, some of which I've put in the appraisal forum, others of which are on academia edu. Networking with other appraisers that only do lender work is how back in early 80s, I went around to every competitor I knew in the San Fernando Valley and told them I'm no longer going to do lender work, and I'll take any other referrals. And a lot of them didn't do litigation at all, or didn't do anything other than lender work. So for the residential appraiser, I think building a relationship with certified general appraisers in your market area is a good thing. I know in my personal circle of friends, we all refer work to each other when we have something that's either a known specialty of theirs or something that we don't appraise, or it's not in our market area. For me, along my path, I got a degree in real estate finance, and then I ultimately got a degree, a master's of science in real estate appraisal. And I know certain kinds of clients really value the education, not just the license. Having degrees and having professional credentials is helps build, or helps one develop more other sources, because other people, especially attorneys, CPAs, really value the education. I'm done.
Oh, very good, Dick. We have a number of questions on the chat function. I'd let Cindy and Bruce and John kind of handle answers to those, but anybody feel free to chime in. If you have any other questions, go to the chat button down at the bottom and type your question in, and we'll try to handle as many of those as we can. We'll go about another 45 minutes, so we got plenty of time. If we run out of questions, we'll stop. But I'll just shut up there. Thank you very much, Steve. That was terrific.
George, I'll put this in the files section of the National Appraisers Forum so everyone can have a copy of it.
Yeah, if you don't belong to the National Appraisers Forum, there's never been a better time to apply for membership than right now, because Steve is the guy that approves people. It's not a big deal, but you know, it keeps the chaff out. And similarly, we have the Community of Asset Analysts. Now that is open only to graduates of the introductory class. We have meetings, short meetings every month. So somebody participates and shares. And then we have a online meeting coming up in June, and then an in-person meeting coming up probably October, probably in Chicago. One last thing, I am doing a class in Chicago. If anybody wants to come as an assistant, I'd love to have you. Give me a call. Should be an interesting class, especially if you're interested in bringing yourself up to date on the use of R, which is so much faster and better than Excel. So I'll open it up. Cindy, you want to handle it?
Sure. Couple of questions. John Blackburn, I think Steve kind of answered this already. Any particular tips for marketing to attorneys?
Well, attorneys, there are basically 5 different specialty areas. So And there's if you go to your local law library, there's directories of attorneys that by specialty. So I would suggest real estate attorneys, trust attorneys are good sources because their clients all have real estate. Certainly bankruptcy attorneys, but that's not my favorite class of work. Divorce attorneys are my least favorite because they have the least respect for other professionals' time and billable hours, although they're very proud of their billable hours. Eminent domain attorneys, that's hard to break into, and it's different work than what one might be used to. I started out by taking courses, and through courses, through people I met in courses, I began to get some eminent domain work. There are some firms in my region that have law firms that have entire eminent domain departments. And I remember I PR'd the senior vice president in charge of eminent domain department in Riverside, California. And he said, "Have you ever testified in an eminent domain trial?" And I said, "No, every case I've ever worked on settled." And I thought that was a good thing, okay? Until my office buddy, Jim Smothers, who did eminent domain almost exclusively, told me a story one time that he told an attorney client that the agency had made his property owner a fair offer, that he should just accept the offer. And this old time attorney cleared his voice and said to him, we don't make billable hours by settling cases. Some attorneys are about billable hours. I know when I went through my divorce, my attorney wanted a $5,000 retainer. But later when he hired me as an appraiser, he had a hard time accepting a $1,000 appraisal fee on a single family. It was unconscionable to him. But nevertheless, it takes time to do what it is we're supposed to do. And one of my favorite sayings, having come from the lender arena, is that appraisers may be overpaid for what they're able to get by with doing, but underpaid for what they're supposed to be doing. Does that make sense? So
I'd like to comment along these lines too, if you're, yeah.
sure.
There are groups out there. One's called Forensic Consultants Association that I belonged to for a number of years. They had a logbook or manual of members that some attorneys use. The other and I would like to share a personal story, but one is I certainly want to endorse what you just said, that different attorneys have different personalities, different attitudes, different abilities. I've worked with attorneys that know how to work with an expert wonderfully, and other ones that are just lost, and you literally have to coach them. But I'll never forget my very first case, which was a divorce, and I made a big mistake. The opposing attorney called me and mumbled something, and I was busy and distracted, and I started talking to him. Big mistake on my part. I broke my appraiser's confidentiality there. Now, he should never have done that either. That's part of the point of this. He ethically should never have tried to contact me directly. Absolutely not. But be careful. Remember that you got to stick with your own ethics, not depend on an attorney. He's not your attorney. He's a client. His job is to convince you that he's right, and they're all different. Craig, I know you've got a lot of background in this area of getting litigation work too. Please share.
Yeah, I do a lot of litigation work. I've got several going right now that involve elder abuse. I've got some where appraisers are defendants on cases I've overappraised. I have some where sellers and real estate agents are defendants, where the buyers have sued them. There are just so many opportunities out there. A few things I'll mention. One, Steve and George already mentioned this, attorneys are advocates. And oftentimes when they hire an expert, yourself, they have an idea of what they want. It's not our job to provide them with what they're asking for. It's like a loan, overappraising a property. I tell attorneys, and a lot of them appreciate this, my conclusions and opinions are the same, whether I'm hired by the plaintiff's attorney or the defendant's attorney. I don't take sides. If you take sides, it'll be figured out by the other side and it won't go well. I've had attorneys actually tell me, hey, when I need a high number, I call appraiser A. They actually name them by name.
Huh.
They go, when I need a low appraisal, I call appraiser C, and they name them by name. Appraisers I've seen in court, and what they said is true. They go, but when I really need to know what it's worth, I call you. And I said, well, that means I'm only getting a third, maybe of your work, or maybe less, but I'll take it as a compliment, because I don't want to be known as the guy where they call high or low. Those appraisers often end up in front of either the state board and or their professional organization, such as the Appraisal Institute. I'm working on one now where high-level designated appraisers were over $3 million, but another one is at about 100,000. I'm involved in another case where I was close to 2 million and another appraiser is close to 100,000. Some of it can be due to extraordinary assumptions. Sometimes I've had cases where all of a sudden I'm designated. I didn't do anything wrong. I just wasn't able to help the attorney with what they wanted. And I even told him up front, I may not help you, but I'm at least giving you the truth. And I just had one a couple weeks ago where he had to de-designate me because he didn't think it was going to help his client. That doesn't hurt my feelings. He will still use me and call me, but you have to stay neutral. You've got to be unbiased and don't take sides. It won't go well.
So it's not okay to be an advocate for your client, but it's very much okay to be an advocate for your opinion.
Yes. Yeah, be an advocate for your opinion. Be careful who you take on as a client. On legal work, before I take anything on, well, one thing first, they often will tell you this isn't going to go to court. Well, when they tell you it's not going to court, it's going to court. Even if there's a 5% chance it's going, everything you do it as though you're going to court. So that includes your initial retainer agreement, everything you do. Keep in mind that everything you've done, every phone call you've made, every text message, every email, every note, everything in your work file is completely obtainable by the other side with the subpoena for your records, and you have to do it.
Very good. Thank you, Craig. Anybody else? The question is, how do you get litigation work? Bruce, you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I'd make a couple comments. I think first and foremost, you really do need to expand your skill set and take as many special beyond what was required to get your license educational offerings. You need to have a really wide breadth and knowledge of appraisal methodology. That's critical. And then on top of that, depending on the niche that you enter, whatever part you're going to serve, there's probably a lot of things that you need to learn about it. For instance, in California, there's some court cases that drive how family law works, more Marsden, and there's a formula that comes out of that. And you really need to understand that. We're not attorneys, but you need to understand what drives the need for different valuations. And then there could be multiple dates that are necessary. The better you understand that, when an attorney or an accountant calls you for that kind of work, they probably don't know. Not all of them. And the better understanding you have, if you can talk with them about it and offer some, hey, would evaluation at an earlier date be applicable here? That makes you useful as an expert. So I think you've got to expand your horizons on your appraisal skill sets, but also learn about what niche you're serving. There's lots of special rules that will apply.
And Bruce is speaking at a conference, Northern California chapter of the Appraisal Institute, on this very topic. And most chapters have a once a year, the larger chapters have a once a year meeting, full day seminar on the topic. So look up the Northern California chapter Appraisal Institute. Yes, Steve.
One of the things that I learned is to offer to do an objective evaluation as a consultant. And then if that's useful to them, then they can name you as an expert. As a consultant, they don't have to reveal you. As a consultant, I've been hired to review the other side's appraisal and provide questions for deposition testimony. A lot of appraisers are afraid of litigation work because they're afraid of being cross-examined. And I mean, I testified in my first litigation case 6 months after I started appraising. And I was totally unprepared for the depth and the breadth of questions that they could ask me. One of the things I would say is, well, I tell you what, I will put a deposition in the file section of the forum so you can read through how they go. It's an information gathering process where the other side wants to find out your opinions, wants to find out the scope of what you did. And in today's environment, you'll have to provide your entire work file, including copies of emails, usually 3 business days before the deposition or before the trial, which is fine. I don't mind that at all. But I think Craig mentioned different dates. I had one case that was going on for 5 years, and they had 2,300 banker boxes of real estate records they wanted me to go through to get the correct dates. I told them, you know, you don't want to pay me, you want to pay me my hourly rate to do that. Get me a researcher and I'll give him the scope of work and have him get that for me. And it involved multiple apartment buildings throughout Southern California, multiple dates back to 1978. I never wrote a report. All I had was a spreadsheet. And I was examined twice on that, probably a total of about 8 hours worth of cross-examination. And so don't be afraid to take litigation work because you're afraid you're going to be examined. Just embrace and employ good processes and procedures, and don't bias your report because of a client's stated need or desire. Just let definitions of value and principles and practices guide your work.
You mean just tell the truth?
Yeah, don't lie.
Oh, no. Cindy, do we have any other questions? I'm sure we do.
What are your thoughts about offering referral fees?
George, you want to handle that?
No,
Oh, okay.
I don't know that I've ever given or taken a referral fee.
I don't think appraisers should offer or pay referral fees. I think, at least in my experience, appraisers who know what I do or know my skills or know my geography are happy to refer work to me, and I and like kind refer to them. I've been paid one referral fee in my lifetime from a broker, and it started out as me doing a field appraisal review, And I met what became the ultimate buyer of the property on a property that the broker had listed for a year. He called me up weeks after I did the review and asked me for my social security number. I said, what for? He said, I'm paying you a $2,500 referral fee. I said, what for? He said, you brought the buyer to me on a deal that I had tried to sell for a year. And I went out and bought a statistics program with it, $2,500.
I'd like to mention, as many of you know, my specialty is values of views and view obstructions and easements, encroachments, that type of thing. And over half my work is referrals from MAIs. Either they're afraid of doing houses, which, believe it or not, a lot of MAIs are afraid of doing houses, and no, they have the foggiest idea how to value a view. And yet, for me, I've got a pattern, a method. That's my specialty. So you might think about a specialty, particularly in a field that you're already somewhat experienced at, whatever it may be.
Cindy, can I,
Yes.
there was a question that I want to kind of answer here. A question regarding that asked, I think it was from Kurt. Is there no appraisal report on a date of death appraisal? And Steve was, I'll speak for Steve because this is what I do. On many, we have to separate appraisal from report, especially on the litigation side. There's the appraisal where you've worked up your opinion of value with your data and statistics and so forth. And then there's the report. Oftentimes our report is oral. And this is the part of USPAP. That's why it's there. We give an oral report to our client. We may write no report at all, and we will give our testimony regarding our oral report. It's kind of the opposite of lending appraising, where the appraisal is considered the appraisal report. So we got to separate those. However, on a this only kind of works on a litigation arena, and it does not work on federal cases. Only on state cases. On federal cases, you must provide a written report. On the date of death, at the state settlement, so forth, those require an appraisal report. However, USPAP allows us two options there, which is appraisal report or restricted appraisal report. Back to the litigation side again, many of my written ones are restricted appraisal report, and even for many others, including these date of death. So we can use USPAP to our favor with these other options.
Yeah, along with this USPAP thing, remember that you have to have a work file. You should bring it with you. But remember that USPAP requires you, once you deliver, it requires that you have that signed certification in your work file. You have no idea how many times I've gone up against another appraiser. I lean over to my attorney. I say, ask him if he's got a signed certification in there. And about 20–30% of the time, that other appraiser has not got that signed certification. And suddenly their credibility goes way down. It's a simple thing. You have to have a signed, dated certification in your work file, even if it's an oral report.
Let me mention one thing about as far as getting work. For those appraisers who are too busy to volunteer their time because they're too busy working, you're not going to get this other work. I don't spend 25% of my time. I don't know what I spend, but I belong to many volunteer organizations. A lot of work and referrals come through that. So I'm not wasting time. I'm helping the community and I'm getting work back. You can join the Bar Association as an affiliate member or whatever they call it. You can offer to give talks to the Bar Association. They're always looking for speakers. So the more you talk, the more you're known outside, even outside the appraisal arena. You can join groups that do the state settlement. They have groups of attorneys and estate planners that do that. MLS, I'm on multiple committees at my MLS. I have received many referrals from being on those committees. So I'd say it's not so much about advertising in Google. You don't want work that's coming from a Google ad. They're not, who are they looking for? They're looking for fast and cheap. So you may as well be doing AMC work. So go to the professionals, get to know them, have them know your name. Some of these you're going to give a talk to. You're going to give cards out. You're going to get a call the next day from one of those attendees that all of a sudden you're going to be a perfect fit for something they have. Not necessarily litigation, but maybe estate work or something else related. But we got to get out of our cocoons we're often in, especially as independent appraisers sitting in our home or office, and get out and join organizations, not necessarily appraisal organizations.
You mean you have to talk to people?
So I'd like to just echo what Craig said, because I've found that to be very successful for me over the years too. I don't think it's just a matter of joining. It's, as Craig said, you have to go prove to people there that you're reliable and you're competent, and just joining won't do that for you. You have to roll up your sleeves and get involved and show that you're a can-do person and that you're reliable.
You mean you have to have an attitude of service?
Absolutely.
Oh, no.
Joined a Rotary Club many years ago. Didn't do much the whole first year I was there. Didn't get much in the way of referral work. During the second year, I started to roll up my sleeves and do a lot and worked with a lot of the members. By the third year, 10% of my business was referrals from Rotarians. Before I left Rotary 10 years ago, it was at least a quarter of my work each year was referrals from Rotarians that knew and trusted me and knew that if they referred me, I would do a good job. And that's happened with lots of other things I've been involved with. I think that's a really worthwhile way, but it doesn't happen immediately. It takes time.
Thank you. Cindy, time for one or two more questions and we'll kind of work towards hanging it up.
A quick question. If have always relied on forms, how do you find templates or samples of narrative reports? Silence, crickets.
Can
Can
you
I give
say,
a couple-
can you repeat that, Cindy?
Sure. If you've always done forms reports and you want to move into narratives, where do you find samples of a narrative report?
Well, I have to jump in there in the stats graphs data science class, especially as we've moved completely to R. Both Bruce does a nearly complete report, and this last time we gave the class, John, who isn't with us right this second.
Yes, he is. He's back.
Are you there, John?
Yeah.
Well, John,
He-
jump in and give us a 30-second description of how you do a complete residential house appraisal in R.
Sure. So I write a complete report in R now, and it's all narrative, and basically copied something that I got from Bruce in one of the first classes I took with George. Bruce had shared some, I guess there were templates from, I don't even remember what agency it was from, but there were a couple of samples. There's all sorts of samples out there for narrative reports. And now I just piece together whatever I need and produce a complete report as a PDF through R. But there's packages that are available out there for narrative report writing, but really I don't think you need that. I mean, you can use Word, you can use R. I think just find some of the samples that are out there. If you're a member of the CAA forum, there are some samples that are in the file section for narrative reports, and just go through those, start piecing it together.
One more question?
So I just sent everyone in the chat what John's referring to. It's a restricted appraisal report for a residential property, and it's from the Appraisal Foundation. And they've put that out. There's a commercial or a non-residential and a residential one, and they're including everything that needs to be in a restricted appraisal report, and it's only 2 pages long. If you're going to make a non-restricted, if you're going to make a complete appraisal report, there's only a couple more things you need to add. It gives you the template, and I think to write a report for a client, you'd want to beef it up and put a little more in there, but it shows the minimum.
Let me mention something. You don't have to do a narrative report. So if you want to do a longer report, an appraisal report, one that I highly recommend is the Appraisal Institute's residential form. I'm assuming you're doing residential property. That particular format and form will probably handle 90% of what you'll be doing on a residential side. If you have appraisal software, that AI form whether it's Total or Bradford, whatever, it is in your package. It's real nice because it's compartmentalized. You can put pieces in and take pieces out. I find that I use it myself. I find it very useful when I'm not doing a full narrative.
Yeah, Bruce, I'm sorry to interrupt. Bruce, your link didn't go out. It's not showing.
It showed up in my chat. Oh, Bruce, you sent it just to me.
Yeah, it's because I was bonehead.
Like
I
it
sent it
worked for
only to
me.
John. I'll resend it.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's do one more question to anybody. And
Yeah, there's this one might take a little while. Steve, someone's asking, how did you initially offer your services as a consultant, and then if found useful in that capacity, could then be hired as the appraiser for the same case?
Well, it starts with the initial conversation with the lawyer or the law firm. And you want enough information about the case, at least I do, to understand what the valuation issues are and understand, which side of the case they're representing. To me, it doesn't make a difference if they're representing the moving party or the defending party. That's not what controls me. As long as I'm able to do my job free of any bias as far as a value or so in that initial conversation, I tell them, you might want to hire me as a consultant first to see what I can come up with. And then you'll be armed with the truth. And if it doesn't serve your needs, you're free to go find somebody else to advocate for, for the value or the direction of value that you want.
and start with lower prices and then go higher.
Can I
Say
mention
that
one
again?
more thing? One more thing.
Yeah.
When you get a call from an attorney on a case, they'll explain what they need. I always do this. I want to see all pleadings. I want to see the complaint. I want to see counter complaints, counter suits. Do you have any depositions? I want to see everything you have first, because I want to make sure I am going to be able to be a fit. The second thing is, where are we at on timing? Timing having to do with discovery, having to do with depositions, having to do with trial. So things have to be done within a certain time frame. I had one this week, called me a couple days ago, and everything sounded good. And I said, where are you at in discovery? She goes, well, I have to name an expert today. It's like, that means I've got to be ready to testify tomorrow. It's they waited too long. I go, when is trial? Well, it's like in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Always ask timing. I didn't take it. I would have liked to have, but the timing wasn't going to work.
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah. Along the lines of what Craig was talking about, I just lost my thought.
I found it.
I'll
I
jump
found
in. I'll jump in on your thought. So one thing that I ask, because I'm in Bakersfield, 2 hours north of Los Angeles, and we'll get calls for, a divorce or something. It's like, okay, well, where's the trial? Oh, it's in LA. Ah, well, you're going to be paying me 2 hours of driving time each way. So do you want that, or do you want, an appraiser who's from down there and is just going to charge you once to drive up here and look at the property? So that's a consideration too, is where is the trial potentially taking place and where are you going to have to testify?
Okay, Steve remembered.
Yes, thank you. When the attorney files the form that declares you as an expert, it has language in that form that he signs under, or they sign under penalty of perjury, that you have done your job and you're ready to be deposed or testify in court. So, like Craig was saying, you could be deposed immediately. I had a class action case against Edison on a transformer that exploded and caused a firestorm that burned down 65 houses. And while I had a adequate retainer, I had only just inspected the property when I was noticed to be deposed at one of the big downtown Los Angeles law firms. And so I showed up and the guy says, "Do you have a report?" I said, "No, I don't." "Why not?" "Because I didn't have time to write one." "Well, what are you here for?" "Well, to honor your subpoena. You subpoenaed me, and so I showed up." He said, "Well, when are you going to have a report?" I said, "In a couple, 3 weeks." He said, "What do you have?" I said, "Well, I got a spreadsheet." And so we went through my file, we went through the spreadsheet. Anyway, that case had a favorable outcome for my client, but knowing not only that once you're declared an expert, you could be deposed almost immediately. And something that I just learned fairly recently is you have a right to be deposed within 60 miles of the courthouse. So as an example, I'll get a Los Angeles firm or a San Diego firm who is going to depose me, and I'll tell my attorney, "Where's the case? The case is in San Bernardino." Then I want to be deposed in San Bernardino County. And they have to accommodate that.
Okay, one last
George-
question.
George, what's your thought on you being asked to take a case, but the check hasn't shown up and the contract's not signed?
I let him know I haven't got the check yet. No retainer. I always ask for a retainer I try to ask for a retainer that in my judgment will carry me to the deposition. And that's what I tell them. And I try to be careful to make sure that I'm telling the truth on what I think my timing will be. There's nothing worse than trying to chase down clients for more money. And they misunderstood, or I didn't explain fully what I thought my fee is going to be. They need to know. They might go find somebody cheaper. That's fine.
So an attorney friend of mine down the hall, and I've done work for him. He said, "Craig, I got to tell you something about attorneys." And I go, "What's that?" He goes, "You can't trust an attorney." There's an attorney telling me this. That was pretty cool. But just recently, within the last 30 days, we had a situation where the check was in the mail, supposedly. But more importantly, this property had to be inspected on a very specific day with a very tight time frame, because both the defendant and the plaintiff in a civil suit, including elder fraud, elder abuse, and so forth, were residing in the same property. I had to be there when the defendant was not there. And so I had one very specific day. I had not been paid yet. I did the inspection because they being the attorney were in a tight position, not by their fault. So I honored it. I did it. And a week or two later, the retainer fee showed up. So yes, one attorney tells me you can't trust attorneys. However, on this particular case, I did. And I didn't put too much work into it, but at least I did the inspection. So a lot of what we do is on trust. If you do a good job for an attorney, they will, or these other that are non-litigation, like these estate settlements, so forth. You do a good job, they will continue to use you. They will refer you. One thing I'm going to suggest for anyone who's moving away from mortgage work and AMC work, don't go in and offer the low fees like you're doing for AMC and mortgage work. That's not a good way to get your foot in the door. I'm not going to tell you what to charge or anything, but I would not do that.
All right. Well, let's get one last thing, Steve, then you can wrap it up. Thank you all for being here. And if you are going to the X conference in Sacramento this coming weekend, I'll be there. Love to see you. I know Joe Lynch was a major part of getting that into Sacramento area. So Steve, wrap it up and thank you all for being here.
Along the lines of fees, one of the things that I try to make clear to the attorney is that I need a certain number of billable hours to go through the process that I go through to come up with a valuation. And some of the work that I do, I contract through another firm called Forensis. They're basically expert witness brokers. And they always have me talk to the client. I never talk about money. I only talk about billable hours. Each of us needs to come to grips with what our billable hours should be. It costs me, with all the resources, it costs me about $100 an hour to be available to go to work. That is all the expenses of my being in business, my insurances, my car, everything, $100 an hour plus my time. So how much is my time worth? How much is your time worth? Most professionals, regardless of the field, most professionals, their billable hourly rate is several $100s an hour. I run into appraisers that have charged as much as $850 an hour. I can't get that because I'm not an advocate, but don't let your billable time slip through because you want to get work. Does that make sense?
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for being here. Please, if you don't have a subscription to the asset analyst or the George Dell, I don't even know what the.
They have to be a subscriber if they're here. To your
that's
George,
right.
to your
Okay.
analog
Thank you all
log.
for being a subscriber.
There's
very-
the coupon code goes out every week
Yeah.
for the $30 off for the Stats, Graphs, and Data Science 1. If you're a TAR subscriber, every week you get the half price coupon in the emails. And if you're a member of the CAA, there are coupons for other classes that will appear in the community.
Also, we are coming up with that 7-hour class, basically bringing up to date on all graduates of Stats and Graphs and Data Science. Anytime in the last 17 years, it's going to be free to you. It'll probably be $79 or $100 for non-graduates, but it'll be just free to anybody that's ever been to the class in the past. I just feel it's a good service. Thank you all for being here.